What's up? What's up? It's your girl, Dr. Tureka Louis, otherwise known as Dr. Lou, your partner in success and progress. And I help people succeed using training, education, and other tools. I wear many hats in my professional services that I offer. One of them is education consultant. And I help both K 12 students and adults who are trying to better their lives with education. And so tonight I come to you from the perspective of a person that's experienced in the area of education, whether it's as an educator, an administrator, and a designer of entire instructional systems. I've been there, I've done that, I've done it all. But I think that the part or the role that I've played that makes this most imperative to my heart and makes me feel like I can't hold on to what I know without sharing it is that I'm also a parent. And I like to make informed decisions as a parent. And I've always fought for the best in education for my children. So I want to support informed decision making to help other parents do the same. So, anyway, I wanted to talk to you guys today about a topic that has been dominating the headlines, and that is critical race theory. I've had people reach out to me in comments of videos, and as you can see, while I'm going through and just sharing with you why I'm doing what I'm doing today, or tonight rather, I've had people reach out to me in the comments of my videos on other live broadcasts as well, just to ask my thoughts on it. And what I have found that really kind of inspired me to do this broadcast today is that a lot of the people talking about critical race theory, I'm just going to check on it. There we go. So you can hear me. A lot of the people that are talking about critical race theory are not necessarily giving you the details as to what it even is. They don't seem to know themselves whether they are for it or against it. And I thought it best to at least provide the information because we need to make informed decisions, both as parents as well as educators and decision makers wherever we are. All right, so I've got you guys up and running. Feel free to comment, guys. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. Just know that I will definitely be addressing those and trying to address them as real time as possible. But I definitely want to get right into the meat of things. And I just want to thank you guys for joining me tonight. So we're talking about critical race theory. Everybody's talking about it. People are up in arms about it. People tend to have really strong feelings about it one way or another. And I shared my perspective in short in a quick TikTok video a while back. And I got a lot of responses and a lot of questions and comments and a few arguments that occurred in the comment section. And I'm okay with that. We don't always have to agree, but we do always have to be civil and respectful of one another. So anyway, I just kind of want to jump into a couple of things. So we're going to hit this from with three major subtopics. Number one, we're going to talk about education as a whole, our education system, and how it got to be the way that it is. And I'm going to be really short. I want you to know this is not one of my educational tutorial videos where I teach in depth about these topics. If you want to see that, I'm definitely going to be dropping videos on my YouTube channel, and that's the Evolve and Expand YouTube channel. So you could just actually search on YouTube, Evolve and Expand, and I will be one of the probably first 2 or 3 thumbnails that pop up. But I will be dropping a video on the history of the education system, how it got to be the way that it is, the history of CRT in this country as well. And that there you can go, just sit down, learn, take notes, do whatever you'd like to do to get as much information as possible. Today, I'm really just kind of going live. I'm going to definitely tie in those things, but my goal is to share with you my perspective and to support why I feel this way and give you enough information that if you're looking to make a decision about not only how you feel about it, but what you should be pushing for as a parent who's also a taxpayer, who also maybe has a child in the school system, or you're just a stakeholder in the community. Because even if you don't have kids, what's going on in the community around you affects you and you should know. All right. So at least you'll know what people are talking about so you can form your perspective. So having said that, let's get right into it. And I did bring, believe it or not, I did bring with me some notes. I usually don't. But today I did because I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget anything. And I also don't want to take up too much of your time. All right. So part of the reason that we're here is because people are having this huge debate on whether or not critical race theory should be taught in schools, in particular K through 12 schools. It's already touched on in most colleges in one way or another. Depending on where you're going to college and how objective that the people at the college might be about their curriculum. But it's been around for quite some time, and not just in certain types of colleges, but in a broad range of college types. there's a huge fight as to whether or not your K-12 child should be taught critical race theory in schools. And most of the people who are arguing about it, who are yelling, whether it's people who are pro critical race theory or people who are strongly anti critical race theory, the points that they're citing have absolutely nothing to do with what critical race theory really is. And I'm not coming at you as a proponent of it. I am not one of the people who brought it to the United States. I just believe in being aware of the different topics of study that are informing how my children are being taught and how schools are being run. Because again, running schools is part of what I've done in my professional career. So it's important to know what in the world they're talking about. Most of the people talking do not. Number one, let's talk about public schools in general, because that's the platform that we're arguing about critical race theory on. We're not saying, the people who are arguing right now aren't saying it shouldn't exist in the world. They're saying they don't want to talk to their kids in K-12 schools. And we need to look at the purpose of a K-12 school before we can even derive an opinion as to whether or not that even aligns with what they promise you they're going to provide in these K-12 schools. Let's look at that, right? So as K-12 schools go, public schools began in the New England area, just like most things did in this country, because that was the first area settled in the United States when the settlers got here. So we're talking about 17th century, right? 1635 to 1642, schools started popping up. Some were free, some were not free, some were paid for by taxpayer dollars, some were not. And these were the schools that eventually evolved into the types of schools that you see now. All right, in 1642, Massachusetts Bay Colony established that proper education should be compulsory. So that was the first time that we saw the law getting involved with schools. In other words, kids have to go to school. And we see that has evolved into the laws right now in your state, whatever state you're watching from. The laws in your state require that children from K through 12 age must attend school. And I think the cutoff age top end is 16 years old. They must attend school. If they don't attend school, parents can be charged with neglect, and they can be arrested, jailed. The parents now, mind you, not the kids, because the states require that you provide your child a free and quality education, and public schools is their offering for that. So that started way back in 1642. I'm telling you this for a reason. I want you to listen to me, and you'll get how this really feeds into this argument about critical race theory. So this is the schools in the North, mind you, what we now call the North. The schools in the South were similar but different. And remember, when we talk South in that era, we're really talking about the Upper South, because the Lower South hadn't even really been settled yet. But in those areas, the planter class would hire tutors. And that's what I want you to understand. Schools and education were really a privilege, not a right initially. And if you really wanted to prove that you were wealthy and of the upper class, you provide your child an education, which was supposed to prepare them for going out into the world and being the leaders that they were going to become. And so, and why that's important for you to know is because, I'm just double checking, I try to keep an eye on the chat. So guys, if you are dropping comments, I definitely want to highlight those. But and while we're at it, real quickly, if you're watching this live, make sure that you say hello in the comments. If you're watching it on replay, make sure you put replay in the comments, because that lets me know how you joined us. But anyway, so down the South, the planter class and those that were more affluent than that would hire tutors to teach their kids. And that's usually what people did. They provided for education themselves based on what they believed that their kids needed in order to go out into the world and carry on the family name, carry on the family business, do the things that upper echelon people felt like their kids should be doing. They were not going to school just because they had to go to school. And they were still closely tied to England. So you're talking about most of the education mirrored what they had seen in England. Now, schools in the North and the South had something in common. They were all institutionalized under the umbrella of carrying forward this country's belief that they were going to give the best and the most to their citizens, and that they were going to be the best and brightest citizens in the world. Now, I want you to imagine in your mind the old-fashioned schoolhouses that existed during this time. And I want you to remember one thing. School was for boys or males, white males, and that is it. That is all. Remember that during slavery, people of African descent weren't even allowed to learn to read. So they were not included in this vision. So to grapple with issues such as race did not exist, because there was one race attending schools in the United States, which even before it was the United States, and that was white. And there was one gender attending school, and that was the male. All right. So the use of race. So there was no reason for them to address the topic of the use of race to prosper these settlers as they come over from England trying to build something. All those schools were devoted to white males. So it wasn't until the late 1700s, the early 1800s, that we even see schools that were established to teach girls, whether it's a school for all girls or whether it was a school for co-eds. We don't see that until the late 1700s, early 1800s. What does that mean? There's no reason to address diversity because there is no diversity. There's no reason to address marginalization of other communities because though the schools were built to serve the people who were benefiting from that marginalization, whether they knew it or not. All right. And I'm not really here to stand on my soapbox and tell you that I'm for or against it. I want you to be informed because you need to know where things come from before you determine if you want to offer them to your children and who you want to feed that information to your children. All right. Now, there were a few exceptions when it comes to this whole education is for white males. Number one, March 1620, a gentleman by the name of George Thorpe arrived in Virginia and took possession of 10,000 acres of land. His goal was to establish a university and to establish an Indian school. Now, he had a very strong, passionate belief and perspective. And I'm going to repeat the words that are in his writing. These are not my beliefs. This is not my perspective, but you need to understand who was providing school for anybody other than white males during that time. He wanted to kill the Indian, save the man. He also had some very choice words to say about people of African descent along the same lines, but he didn't use the word Indian. I'm telling you that because, again, schools were established with this particular purpose. I know that's hard to hear and it's hard to say, but he left behind lots of writings that shared this perspective. So this is not new. That school was burned down in a revolt, probably a few years after it was established. There were lots of atrocities that occurred, as you can imagine. But we'll talk about that later if need be. Again, this is really to tie into critical race theory. I want you to understand the perspectives that tie into this big argument that people are having right now about whether or not it should be offered in K-12 schools. And part of the reason I'm telling you this is because you need to think about the purpose of K-12 schools in order to decide if it's even fair to ask them to offer something like that. All right, so here's the challenge. The same facts that are tied to the history that most kids learn are the major elements that are left out of the history that kids are being taught. And that is intentional because you have to cut around a lot of those facts in order to get to what's currently taught in most classrooms today. Excuse me one moment. 30 minutes, guys. Remember I said I was a parent? Got kids in the background asking about video games right now. All right. So, but the reason that that's important to understand, right, is because the history curriculum that your child is being exposed to, that's being taught to your child right now, doesn't include anything about those Indian schools, but it does mention when the first schools were established. Not sure why it wouldn't include that because that's part of the history, right? It does not acknowledge that the schools were built for white boys only to attend. It does not acknowledge any of that stuff, right? But we do hear about how women and girls did not get educated as early as boys. So I say that to say we can also accept the fact that other curriculums are being created at this time to try to bridge the gap, to try to bring up to speed the history that your child is being taught, not so much to villainize one group or another, but to add the layers that are missing that were kind of carved out intentionally. All right. So hence the effort to teach less redacted history. And that's why critical race theory, even though it's a theory about how things operate now, it's being introduced as part of history curriculum because they want to teach how the theories came into being and how those things impacted and created the America that we currently live in. And so it's not for the sake of horrifying children, to the contrary, but it's for the same reason that the kids learn about the Holocaust, that they learn about World Wars I and II, and so much more. It's so that they will understand their history, so that they can understand where we are from the perspective of where we've been and how we got there. So that is just a brief history of schools, right? Now we're going to get into critical race theory. And the value of understanding that why you need to know the history of schools is because when you're pushing to get things like critical race theory introduced into schools, you need to know the organizations that you're pushing and you're requesting that they provide this for your children. Okay. And again, if you're watching this live, make sure you say hello. If you're watching this via the replay, make sure you drop replay in the comments. If you have questions, concerns, doubts, disagreements, please put them in the comments. I would love to have a conversation with you. And so I'll keep going. And as I said, if you want to know more about the history of education in America, feel free to jump on over to my YouTube channel. Not now, but later on after this video is over. And I will definitely, I know there's a video on school types that I'll link in the description of this video later, but there's also, I will drop a video on the history of education in America if enough people ask me about it, and on the history of critical race theory, because I'm not going to go into super detail, but I'm just going to touch a little bit so you'll know what in the world it is. So let's get to the meat of it, because we've only been together for what, 15 minutes. So let me get to the meat of critical race theory. What is it? Where did it come from? Why are we trying to put it in schools? And why are people so upset about it? So critical race theory, is important to know what its predecessor was if you're going to understand it. It's born of a movement called critical legal studies. And that was an effort to expand and expound on and understand the disparities that we see in the legal system between the treatment of people of color and the treatment of people who are not people of color. So, you know, for lack of a better term, you hear the phrase white people, but if that offends you, people who are not people of color. Okay. Now, here's the unique thing. Most of the people that you see going off about critical race theory, they don't want it in schools and stuff. Most of the people that you see doing that are politicians, they are conservatives. But guess what? Critical legal studies, which is critical race theory's daddy, challenged liberalism. It denied that the law was neutral, and it denied that there was a singular correct answer for every single case. It also highlighted the importance of people's rights. But here's what happened. People who were researching critical legal theory or critical legal studies back in the day, the people of color who were associated with it were villainized and marginalized. They were treated horribly. And that got them thinking, see, if you really want things to get popping, pick on a person that's a student. Pick on a person that is a philosopher. They're going to want to dig deeper to find out why. Why are you so upset? Which was my response when I'm seeing people screaming and yelling about critical race theory and they don't even know the definition. Why are you so upset? What's triggering you? All right. So when they looked a little deeper to find out why the people of color were being marginalized just for encouraging the exploration of the impact of bias on the legal system and how people were being treated, they began to look at these broader issues, and what kept coming to the surface are the concepts that are now seen as the tenets, the 5 tenets of critical race theory. All right. And a tenet is much like a pillar, right? It's like the foundational things. I see that D.E. Ortiz Rodriguez is watching. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm trying to acknowledge you guys as you come in. I'm trying to acknowledge your comments. I'm trying to acknowledge your hellos, but I definitely don't want to waste your time. All right. So let's talk about the 5 tenets of critical race theory. And by the way, if you're finding value in this video and you know somebody who will find value in it as well, please share it. My name is Dr. Tureka Louis, and I'd be happy to clarify any questions you may have about anything that I'm saying today. All right, so 5 tenets, 5 major concepts, beliefs, the foundations, the fundamental beliefs in critical race theory. You're going to be shocked at what it's not, I guarantee it. Number 1, that racism is normal. It's not an anomaly and it's not irregular. And I'm not going to get into each one of them. I'm going to list them off to you first. And then I'm going to tell you why I think they're triggering people, that critical race theory is triggering people. But number 1, racism is normal or ordinary. Sorry, not normal. Ordinary, not abnormal. So that doesn't mean that you're pro-racism. That just means that you accept that it's something that exists in everyday living, that we encounter it in some way. All right, number 2, the concept of interest convergence. We're going to talk about what that means in a minute. Number 3, race is a social construct. Number 4, the notion of storytelling and counter storytelling. And number 5, the idea that whites have actually been recipients of the benefits of civil rights legislative efforts. Again, I'm going to say that again. And I want to make sure I'm saying it in a way that's not triggering, but I need you to hear me. The idea that people who are not people of color are actually benefiting from benefiting from civil rights and social justice legislation. Now, that's it. Those are the 5 tenets of critical race theory. So you may be asking yourself, why are people so upset about it if that's all that it is? Because I've heard people saying critical race theory is designed to teach children that all white people are racist from 2 months old, and that people of color must rise up to attack their oppressor. Critical race theory is not that type of a movement. It's a movement designed to examine how the systems around you may be influenced by race, may be impacted by race or racial systems or systemic racial integration of, let's see, what's the word I want to say? Systemic integration of race principles. That's what I'll say and leave it at that. And that's not me trying to soften it. It really is not that complicated. And it really is not this battle that people are trying to make it out, especially the people that are anti CRT. And that's what I'll call it from here on out. Okay, so let's talk about how those 5 tenets may be triggering. Number 1, if racism is ordinary, and that's why I said ordinary, right? I said normal earlier, but what I mean by it is ordinary. It's not abnormal. It's not out of the norm. It's there. But if racism is ordinary, then that challenges the arguments of colorblindness and meritocracy that people who are trying to demonstrate that they're not racist like to rely on. So that in and of itself is going to make a person who feels better about themselves because they see no color and they feel like anything they got on their own merits. So that then me saying, or anybody saying, that racism is ordinary fact of life in America, it triggers them. And that's what you hear the arguments about. Stop saying that America's a racist country. You know, I know a lot of people want people to admit that America's a racist country. I personally don't care if anybody ever calls America racist as a country. I personally don't care if a person ever acknowledges that they are racist. I personally don't need that label. What I need to see is the acknowledgement of racism as a ordinary thing in everyday life that has impacted all of us. That would be more valuable to me. All right. Because in saying that, what you're doing and the reason that it's triggering is because it takes away the distancing that a person can put between themselves and either being the beneficiary of institutionalized racism or the victim. And I hate to use the word victim. So what's a better word? And it's not because I'm trying to hide from it. I don't think that, but let's just say it that way. It takes away the ability to deny the impact of racism and institutionalized racism, whether or not you are the beneficiary or the person getting oppressed. Okay, it does. It takes away. And so a lot of people don't want to lose that. Number 2, interest convergence basically implies that allies to people of color are only going to fight for equality to the extent that it benefits them, or at minimum does not inconvenience them. And that's just common sense. Like, I hate to say it that way, but people who are in their feelings about it, it's really easy. What it's really saying is that it's easier to help somebody out if it either benefits you or at minimum doesn't cause you any inconvenience. That's true. There are a lot of people that'll help a person until it's inconvenient. And it's not to say that nobody will be an ally if it's inconvenient. It's to say that you're less enthusiastic about it. What part of that is a lie? No lies told there. All right. Number 3, it calls race a social construct. And here's the thing. The same people that will argue that they don't see color and that they got everywhere on their own merit, and that they believe that in this world, as long as you work hard, you get what you invest, you get out of it what you invest into it. Race is not an issue. Those same people will get upset with you if you say race is a social construct. It's just, in other words, it's just something that was created in order to create social structure. So either you believe that race is not and it does not. Either you believe that race bears no impact on your success, or you don't. That's all I'm saying. Because those two things actually go together hand in hand. They complement one another. They don't lie to each other. They don't conflict. And so saying that race is a social construct, let me just say, even the people who don't see race benefit from other people. They have unspoken benefits or challenges because other people see race. And think about it like this. It's like a supermodel saying that she always felt ugly growing up. She didn't have a lot of confidence. She didn't have a lot of dates with boys, but she's a supermodel. And when I say supermodel, that means somebody that's made a lot of money off of modeling, somebody that has, parlayed that into other things. And so they've created a lifestyle. So if you benefit off of being seen as attractive, it really doesn't matter whether you think you're attractive. What matters is, do other people think you're attractive? Because one thing is for sure, if you're a supermodel, the only reason you got paid is because somebody thought you were attractive or thought you were a good representative of their product. So that's an example of a person that's benefiting from being seen as one thing by everyone else, even if they say that they don't believe that they're that. Like a supermodel who feels unattractive. She's saying, I don't see myself as attractive, right? But if you're a supermodel, it implies by definition that you benefited from other people seeing you as attractive. And that in and of itself is the challenge that we run into, trying to convince people that race is a social construct. But you can't find where race you cannot find where race existed prior to its use as a social construct anywhere. People weren't teaching about race. People weren't informing you about the difference between black people and white people or whatever, brown people and whatever. People weren't doing that until it was necessary to tell you who was inferior to whom. And so because of that, there is some validity to the argument that race is a social construct. That's one of the tenets of CRT. That's all it says. Doesn't say one race is better than another. Doesn't tell one race to rise up against another. It says that race is a social construct. And by social construct, something that is used to construct systems and order in society. Social construct. All right. And then number 4, use of storytelling. Well, that gives voice to the heard, to the formerly unheard. So storytelling and counter storytelling is where you either get to tell your story from an authentic space, or where you can tell a counter story that speaks truth to something that is formerly believed to be one thing, or to omit parts of the truth. It's the reason that the Holocaust units were included in so many classrooms. It's because before there was an effort to properly teach what happened in the Holocaust, and before there was an effort to authentically teach it, students were being told nothing about it, or things that the survivors felt were untrue. And because of that, they were given a voice. Critical race theory seeks to allow storytelling as a means of allowing the disenfranchised to have a voice. Now, here's the deal. In America, in the United States of America, even MLK and Malcolm X's stories are often first told to our children from an instructor that is probably not a person of color. The curriculum was written by a person that probably wasn't a person of color. The company that published the curriculum was probably owned by people that were not people of color. And I'm not saying that people of color should own everything that touches before it comes to your child's desk, but I'm just saying there was a lost perspective there. Critical race theory would seek to kind of add in the storytelling and the historical elements that may be lacking just because of lack of awareness. Because the people whose story it is and the people who could most relate to the story, well, they're not being heard. They don't have ownership of the story. Okay. And if you don't believe it, ask the families of these men or other civil rights leaders back in the day. What the stories that their families tell and the stories that you read in those school books is not one and the same. It is absolutely not. And a lot of the family members are afraid to even speak up and say anything. They will speak, but they will speak softly because they don't want reprisal. They don't want consequences. Ooh, I see somebody commenting. I was sure it was Disabilities Critical Studies CRT came from. Oops. Yeah, that's the whole point of this broadcast, Bob, is that most people that are either listening to these arguments or arguing about critical race theory have absolutely no idea what critical race theory actually is. And it's very easy to become afraid of something or to fight for something if you don't know what it is and you're being told using triggering words. So that's my point. That's the whole point for this live, is to try to give some clarification, and just from a scholarly standpoint, because that's what I'm trying to do. The 5 tenets of critical race theory, I broke down from a scholarly standpoint. I'll definitely cite the white papers that I used. I didn't just look it up on Wikipedia, but you can look it up on Wikipedia and see some of this stuff. So it's not that hard to find it out. Make sure that you make an informed decision. That's the whole point. We got to make an informed decision. So the bottom line is, the issue is like, and the issue of that, to me, going back to what I was saying, the people who are connected to these stories and not having a say in telling them, it goes right back to what checks and balances are, right? Checks and balances are designed so that you are having to collaborate with others who may not think like you in order to get the fairest, best opportunity for everybody involved. And so with critical race theory, up until now, what's being taught in the schools wasn't really taken from a standpoint of hearing from the communities of color that were most greatly impacted by a lot of the things that occurred throughout history. And there are a lot of things that people just don't know that happened. And we shouldn't have to get all of our information from YouTube videos or self-appointed activists, or even comedians who are also talk show hosts, although shout out to Trevor Noah and others like him. I enjoy what you're doing, but I'm saying let the scholars be scholars as well. Like, take that ball and run with it to like, if we're going to learn about history, let's learn about history. That's the bottom line, since we're supposed to be all in this together. And that's what I see. And you would think that means that I think critical race theory should be taught in schools, but I still haven't told you my perspective. I'm going to tell you in just a minute, and I think it's going to surprise you. Okay, so I see somebody in the chat already saying CRT is racist. Tony, I'd love for you to tell me what element of CRT you believe to be racist, so we can look at it together. Because your statement is part of the reason that I'm here. Again, I'm not a defendant of CRT. I didn't bring it into schools. I have not advocated for it to be in schools, but I'm seeing people either say statements like yours or say the opposite. It's just designed to do something that is totally not designed to do. And so I wanted to explore it together. I wanted us to talk about it together so that people can make informed decisions about what they think should be done with it, if anything, but at least you would know. So Tony, I would love for you, thank you so much for saying that. I would love for you to tell me what about critical race theory you find to be racist, and make sure you point it out using some reference to critical race theory itself other than just CRT. So what I mean by that is, if you say that it's racist, I want you to point out one of the tenets, one of the fundamental principles, something that shows me that it is. And make sure that it's your words or your research and not just something you heard on TV all by itself. But if that's all you got, put that out there and we'll definitely talk about it. All right, but thank you so much for commenting. That's what I wanted, discourse. All right, so anyway, discourse means conversation. All right, so here's my unique perspective, okay, about critical race theory. I've told you what it is, and I've told you where it came from. What I didn't tell you that I want to make sure that I point out is this. The origins of critical race theory are not from, so once we talked about that it came from critical legal studies, right? But what we didn't talk about was where that came from. And I'm just going to say real quick in a couple of sentences and then move on because I don't want to bore you. But critical theory itself was actually we first find it heavily mentioned in Germany in the early 1900s. So even though critical race theory we see here in about the 1970s and 80s in America, it was talked about there as an effort to understand history better and to acknowledge that the social structures that we currently have, or rather the problems that we see in society, usually come more from social structures and social structures and cultural assumptions. Social structures and cultural assumptions rather than individuality and psychological states. So what that means is this, because think about what that says. Most people who are biased toward people of other races tend to cite that the persons that they believe are the reasons that they should be are bad actors, right? And usually that's why they're going to say that they're not racist. They're just pointing out that person is a bad actor. He is bad, evil, whatever you want to say, or she. And that's the whole point, is that the two psychologists that fed into critical theory felt, and I'll tell you whose work got pulled in as they furthered the study of it. In just a second, you're gonna find this interesting. But that's basically what they're saying, is that no, it comes from social structure, and it comes from your cultural assumptions, the things you assume about other cultures or people's cultures, that lends itself to social problems more so than individuals and their actions and their psychoses. And that is true. Like, a lot of people will argue that that's true. I'll put it that way. Having said that, that's what critical theory is, and that goes way back further than that. It has nothing to do with America. It has nothing to do with people of color. But it was one of the theoretical underpinnings that the people seeking to understand what was going on here in America relied on to try to understand it better, because it's still a social phenomenon. It still has to do with how we're interacting with each other. All right. So I found that to be interesting. And guess who the two philosophers were that they pulled from their works? One was Karl Marx, and the other was Sigmund Freud. You know what's funny about that? Kids learn about Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud every day. In economics, we learn about socialism, communism, and capitalism. Marx is always brought up. In psychology, and every kid in America who gets a general diploma, with few exceptions, has to take a psychology one-on-one class. They will hear about Sigmund Freud a lot. And nobody says, we don't want to tell our kids what he's saying. We feel like this is offensive. We feel like it's unhealthy. Nobody says that at all. It's just when we try to intersect their perspectives to understand how race has impacted this country that we see people having a fit. And that's important. We should think about that. And I'm going to get to my perspective in just a second. I want to respond to Bob. Bob says, anti-racism curriculum has been taught in elementary schools for a while now. Is that enough if CRT is banned? Well, Bob, the thing about it, that's a great question. CRT is not really about being anti-racist so much as it's about making us aware of how race is impacting the systems that we interact with on a daily basis. So they're not mutually exclusive. They're not necessarily synonymous with one another. And anti-racist curriculum has not been consistently taught in schools. Again, part of my work, I've been an educator, but I have also been an instructional system designer and an administrator. I've also sat in the rooms where they discuss and develop the standardized testing and the standards by which students are taught. And anti-racism is not included, as much as, you know, you may have had the benefit of it being taught in your schools. And I believe over the past 1.5 to 2 years, school systems have become more sensitive to it. But if we're not careful, because of the triggering, because of how easily we're triggered by talking about things like this, we will take 2 steps back for any steps forward. And again, I'm not necessarily arguing that anti-racism curriculum should be taught. Where you do see glimmers of it is it'll be interwoven into character building. So like the little extra units in elementary school and stuff, where you also telling, you give them a story about little Marcy and little Bill and how they're playing together. And all of a sudden Bill pushes Marcy and takes her toys, and how we should be kinder to others. Well, then they would also say something like, and we also don't want to pick on Marcy because of the color of her skin, and keep it moving. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't help the students understand how easy it is to be biased about Marcy, and you don't even know it, right? But the students' parents probably don't want to hear that either. And so that's why I'm like, you know, but look, so in answer to your question, as a parent, if I'm sending my kid to a public school, I don't necessarily care if they teach my child anything about anti-racist behavior, as long as the school is operating in a manner where my children are not being oppressed or picked on because of their race. And if you're going to teach history, I would prefer it not have like a lot of intentional revisions and skewed perspectives. I'm okay with it being pro-America. We live in America. I'm good with that. But if you're going to tell the story, go ahead and tell it, and don't intentionally leave out parts that may or may not resonate with my child, because, you know, it's a little uncomfortable for the curriculum writers or for the majority. So that's what I will say. Yeah, because I think that's been done. But again, I really have gotten to the point where I feel like it is super important to not ask people to do things they don't want to do for me. And that includes teaching my children things because, and I'll tell you why. And I'm skipping ahead and telling my perspective. But the bottom line is this: if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it to my standards that I would hope you would do it to anyway. And as a person who knows what education should look like, I know when people are mailing it in. You know, I've seen what happens when you put an underqualified instructor who doesn't know something in front of a group of kids, and you push them and force them to teach it in order for a paycheck to be given. It is not good. It is the reason students are failing standardized tests right now, is because the math teacher doesn't know math well enough to teach it, or they know math, but they don't know how to teach it. You see what I'm saying? And so that's the danger. So let me get into my unique perspective about critical race theory in public schools, because I've kind of like let the cat out of the bag. Number one, I really don't believe that it needs to be taught in public schools across the board, because schools are already struggling to teach kids what they're supposed to be teaching them. And I know from the inside out. And that's not to downplay myself or my success or my colleagues' success or anything else like that. When you start asking people to teach things that they have no expertise in, these are complex subjects. These are complex theories that have been evolved over time. So even if you simplify it to elementary school level, if the teacher doesn't understand it or believe it to be so, they're not going to teach it. Let me tell you they're not. And this gets into, I had one parent comment the same thing on their TikTok videos, that right now the school's not even teaching her kids math well. Why do we want them to teach critical race theory when we don't even understand it? And so let me tell you this, qualification is one of the reasons why I would rather the school not. Just let me find somebody else to do it. And I've had people argue with me on TikTok about, well, I don't just think about my kids, think about other people's kids. As an educator and as a professional who is a coach and a consultant, I'm always thinking about everybody's kids. And your child is better off with a tutor, which you can find for budget prices if you need to. Or you find somebody like me who makes sure that they get what they need, even if we have to find ways to get it donated. The bottom line is your child is better off learning it from somebody who knows what they're doing, and not touching it at all in class except to take those tests, than trying to learn it from somebody who doesn't. Because I have seen a teacher work a math problem incorrectly on the board for students in a struggling school to then learn. What good comes from that? They're going to fail. They're going to miss that problem. They're going to miss that concept, and they're going to fail the standardized test. And people are going to question if those students are the problem when really the teacher didn't know it. And so that is why, if a teacher feels that way, if school systems are bucking against it, then fine, don't worry about it. If I feel like my child needs to learn about critical race theory, I'll teach them, or I'll find somebody who will. And we would do that, right? Like the person who argued with me on TikTok and said, you only care about your kids. If I wanted my child to be a great basketball player, I'm going to go find him a coach. I'm not going to pretend like I know it. I'm not going to say if it's not offered at the school, I'm not going to do it. If I want my child to excel, I'm going to invest. If you're not willing to invest, then just say that then. All right. So anyway, qualification is the problem. Number one, bias. There is a certain level of the God complex that we see in doctors, that we see people treat doctors and lawyers with, that happens in schools too. Parents want to drop their kids off at school and forget about it and assume that the school knows what it's doing and that everybody in there is an expert at their job and that everybody's going to be okay. But if there's one thing we learned this past year and a half, 2 years dealing with COVID and having to have our kids at home learning, is that is not the case. Okay? You're dropping your kid off at school, but there's no guarantee that the person in that room knows what they're doing. There's no guarantee that the person in that room is even qualified to manage the classroom. And for that reason, things happen. For that reason, your child is crying when it's time for them to learn. And what a lot of us did was we blamed it on COVID. We blamed it on online learning. Honey, your child was doing that in the classroom. I guarantee 80% of the kids who were sitting in front of the computer, totally confused, didn't know what they were doing. If your child is 3 grade levels behind, guess what? COVID had nothing to do with it. And if that's the case, then understand you've got teachers that don't know what critical race theory is. You've got decision makers that don't want it taught in schools. They are not going to provide the appropriate training. They're not going to make an investment in the proper curriculum. And then we're right back where we started. If that's the case, we'd be better off to just leave things the way that they are and supplement. Number 3 or number 4 or number 5, wherever we are, they don't want to. The level of pushback we are receiving indicates that they don't want to. Why would you fight with somebody to try to force them to teach your child something they don't want to? Would you leave your child at a babysitter that told you they didn't want to watch your child? That's what you have to ask yourself. So even in the case of the doctor with the God complex, we have a responsibility. Yes, the doctor has to be a doctor, and we just find another doctor, but we also have a responsibility to care for ourselves, to take vitamins, to eat, try to eat right, to work out, or whatever your situation is. If you have a condition and you find out that you've got this condition and you need to rectify it, we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves. And we have a responsibility to our kids to do the same. Okay? Schools alone cannot do everything that they have even tried to do, even if their intentions are good, even if they got qualified personnel. Understand that some of the stuff that schools are being asked to do is well past educating our kids, right? When schools closed because of COVID, there were children that didn't eat. The school is now responsible for feeding your child too. It's responsible for so many things. There are some things that are going to slip through the cracks. Critical race theory, I got you. I cover that. Don't worry about it. That's how I feel about it. And I'm privileged from the perspective of being an educator, but you can call an educator like me to help you if you don't know what you're doing. That's the whole point. You would call a tutor to help your child with math. All right. So anyway, I believe that we as parents have to supplement our children's education. And in some cases, we're going to have to take full responsibility for it ourselves to be in the best interest of children. After this past year and a half with watching what schools have done, or schools have tried to do, watching what's happened to our kids in this country educationally as a result of COVID, I am even more convinced that we will have to, as parents, take an active role if our children are going to be successful. All right. So we don't necessarily have to do it ourselves, but we can buy curriculum. We can pull in experts. We can pay consultants. We can pay tutors, and we can partner with other families. Right? So if you want your child to learn about critical race theory and have a more balanced historical perspective, it's up to you to do something about it. Do not ask the public schools to do it. Public schools were born of a system that was designed to serve white males. I'm not saying it has not attempted. I'm not saying that our public school systems, statewide, nationwide, and local communities, I'm not saying they haven't made an effort to shift, but it's going to take some time for it to get fully, it's going to take some time to fully course correct. And in the meantime, if you're not willing to supplement, then your child will be missing out on certain things. Now, for some students, they can still get by. For some schools, they go above and beyond anyway. But if your child is among the many more students that are not in one of those categories, then trust me, you need to do more, and you can. Even if money is an issue, you can. All right. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm not the only education consultant in the world. Google it. But I definitely am dedicated to helping families to get the best in education. I have seen it work for my children biologically. I've also seen it work for the hundreds, if not thousands, of students that I've served over the years on various budgets, from zero budget to I can pay for a whole school. What do I need to do to get my kid the best? It doesn't matter where you fall in that spectrum. What matters is, are you ready to fight for your kid? And for adults who are not looking at this because you're worried about your child, you need to be aware of how racial constructs have impacted your life, how they will impact you if you ever find yourself in a courtroom for any reason. Not so you can be mad about it. I'm not even trying to get you to fight power right now. What I'm trying to get you to do is to be aware so that you can work with that system or away from it, however you choose to, in order to build a better life for yourself and all of those whom you love. So ironically, critical race theory was designed to help you to become more aware of how racial constructs have impacted your life. It started out when law students were trying to look at how racial constructs impacted the legal system. But because of the pushback they received, they pulled back deeper. They pulled back actually and wanted to look at how it affects and impacts the systems as a whole. You would do well to learn a little bit about it, as well as other theories that exist that will help you to understand the world around you. Whether you choose to learn that or not, my advice to you is to be willing to study for yourself, be willing to reach out to people who are willing to make themselves experts and provide resources. And please do that for your child. Because if you don't, it will not be the school's fault. While we don't deal in blame here, we do deal in responsibility. It is our responsibility to make ourselves successful. It is our responsibility to help our children to have all the tools they need for success. And we can do this together. So anyway, thank you so much for listening to me. Let me make sure that I didn't miss any comments. Let's see. Here's another good one. Bob says, how can we form an anti-racist society if we can't teach the kids? Bob, here's the thing. I'm not saying that you can't teach the kids, but I am saying this. Don't start teaching until you fully understand. So what we need to do is first educate ourselves. We as parents, because we're talking about teaching the kids, have got to stop sending our kids to school saying, I don't know, but I want you to know it all. You need to get a fuller understanding of, because For most parents that are on that page, we don't feel successful ourselves, but you want your child to go to school and become successful, more successful than you. Okay, will you be willing to be a lifelong learner? And it will be much easier to convince your child to do so. So, if you want to form an anti-racist society, you need to first understand how race impacts your society, and then you need to decide what society you actually want to create. Because when you say anti, whatever comes after it, you tend to create more of that. Right? So if I want an anti-poor society, I'm going to create a wealthy society. If I want an anti-racist society, I'm going to create a more balanced society, a society in which all citizens are created with the same deference to their life and their health and their well-being and their freedom to pursue happiness as long as it doesn't infringe upon the rights of others. And so the first thing we would have to do, Bob, is we're going to find it for ourselves, because you cannot give what you don't have. All right. And the example I'll give you for that is this. I was raised by a person who is an expert retail manager. My very first part-time job, I was a teenager, and they quickly wanted to promote me to the manager of a store. Now, I was not at all responsible enough to be ready for this, but I knew the skill set because parents teach what they have. I'm an educator, so guess what my kids are good at? School. Even if they hate a subject, even if they, all it takes is if they make one bad grade, I'm sitting down looking at, okay, what is it about this process that's not connecting with you? How can we open up your ability to understand it better? And then the next thing you know, they got it. And it's not just my kids. I do that as a consultant. I do that as a coach. I do that for other families too. I have yet to meet a student that I couldn't help, or that could not be helped. Let me say it that way. And I say that to say this: if you want to teach, start by being it yourself. Start by becoming it yourself, and start by believing it can be done. And Bob, that's a really great question. And the bottom line is, and I see you saying thanks. Thank you for asking. But the bottom line is we have to be willing. We have to be willing. And if we're beneficiaries, we have to acknowledge that, Bob, because one of the challenges that people have is as allies to communities of color struggle with acknowledging that they are beneficiaries. And if they without guilt, because it is what it is. You know, guilt has never gotten us anywhere. Don't feel guilty about it. What are we going to do now? So, you know, and so I say that as with anything else, figure out what you want to create. You got a much better chance of creating it than figuring out what you don't want. Think about that. Think about how many people say, I don't want a cheater. I don't want to date a guy who cheats. And guess what they date? Guys who cheat. I won't say how I know. But anyway, thank you guys so much for sharing this time with me. This time has flown by. I plan to be back online every weekend to talk about things that matter to you, to me, to all of us as a global community. I think that this whole critical race theory has forced us to have some great conversations. Some of the people yelling, though, I don't think they're ready to talk. And that's okay. Never be afraid to go take care of it yourself. Right? You know, you hear people telling you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Okay, never be afraid to go get what you need yourself. There are curriculums out there if you're really interested in teaching your child more about how race impacts the community around them and help them to be more of a change agent. It's not going to make their life harder. It'll actually make it easier. Let me know if you need my help finding referrals to those types of things. Just comment, send a direct message. I'll be happy to respond. Thank you again for spending this time with me. Hopefully now you will make the informed decisions about whether or not you want critical race theory taught in your local public schools, or if you want to learn about it yourself, if you're an adult trying to figure it out or not. But remember, whatever decision you make, stand by it, be ready to face the consequences of it, and be informed. Until next time, it's your girl, Dr. Tureka Louis, otherwise known as Dr. Lou. I am your partner in success and progress. As I always sign off and say, I love you, I believe in you. And for now, I am out.